The heavy door of the football changing room swung shut with a resounding thud, the echoes bouncing off the cold, damp walls. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and fear as the girls looked around at each other, their eyes wide and brimming with unshed tears. Kirsty, a young and vibrant schoolgirl whose passion for football had once been the spark in her eyes, felt the weight of the room pressing down on her shoulders. Her heart raced in her chest, a caged bird desperately seeking an escape. The room was dimly lit, casting eerie shadows that danced around them as the fluorescent lights flickered erratically. The clank of metal lockers and the dull murmur of the showers in the adjacent room served as a grim reminder of the reality that unfolded in this sacred space of camaraderie and sportsmanship. For months, the whispers had been growing louder. Coach Stevens, the man who was supposed to be their mentor and protector, had been using his power to manipulate and abuse the girls under his care. His cruel smile and lecherous gaze had become the bane of their existence, a constant source of dread that followed them through every practice and game. They had tried to ignore it, hoping it would go away, but the whispers grew to screams when they could no longer hide the bruises and the pain. The changing room was their sanctuary, a place where they were meant to shed their school personas and become athletes. But now it had been tainted by the very man who had promised to guide them to greatness. His office, a tiny, windowless room adjoining the locker area, had become a chamber of horrors for many. Kirsty knew all too well the terror that lay behind that closed door. She had been one of his first targets, her youthful enthusiasm and innocence making her an easy prey. The season had been going well for the team. They were on the cusp of making it to the finals. But the price they paid for their success was a secret they had all agreed to keep, a burden that grew heavier with each passing day. The team had become divided, the trust between them fractured by the fear and guilt that each girl carried. Some had succumbed to his twisted games, while others had managed to avoid his clutches, but all felt the stain of his presence on their beloved sport. Kirsty's thoughts swirled as she sat on the hard wooden bench, her hands trembling as she tried to tie her laces. She could feel the other girls' eyes on her, the unspoken questions and accusations hanging in the air like a dark cloud. Why hadn't she said anything sooner? Why had she allowed it to happen to her, and by extension to them? The guilt was a living, breathing entity, festering inside her, a constant companion that whispered in her ear, telling her she was weak, that she deserved the pain. The locker room door swung open, and in walked Coach Stevens, his whistle swinging from his neck like a noose. The air grew colder, the tension in the room palpable. His eyes swept over the girls, his smile widening as it found Kirsty. He took a step toward her, his hand reaching out to pat her on the back, and she flinched away, her body involuntarily recoiling from his touch. The room grew still, the air thickening until it was almost impossible to breathe. "What's wrong, Kirsty?" His voice was a sneer, a knife's edge wrapped in a velvet glove. "You're looking a little peaky." The words hit her like a blow to the stomach, and she felt the bile rise in her throat. She forced herself to look up, meeting his eyes, and found only malice staring back at her. The other girls shifted uncomfortably, their own fears reflected in their faces. Kirsty knew that she could not stay silent any longer. She had to find a way to expose him, to save herself and her teammates from his clutches. The girls played with a ferocity that was unmatched, their movements precise and coordinated as if they were one being with a singular purpose. Coach Stevens watched from the sidelines, his eyes narrowed with suspicion, his hand resting on the clipboard that concealed the camera he had used. The final whistle blew, and the score was in their favor. The crowd erupted into cheers, but the girls' victory was bittersweet. They had won the game, but the war was far from over. As they gathered in the changing room to celebrate, Kirsty took a deep breath and turned to face her teammates. "We can't let this go on," she whispered fiercely. "We can't let him win. We have to tell someone." The room was silent for a moment, and then, one by one, the other girls nodded. They knew she was right. They had to come forward, to shatter the silence that had kept them captive for so long. The locker room door swung open and the coach stepped in, his face a mask of triumph. "Good game, girls," he said, his eyes lingering on Kirsty. "But remember, you all owe me for this win." Without warning, Kirsty stepped forward, her fists clenched at her sides. "No, coach," she spat, her voice trembling with anger. "We don't owe you anything. You're the one who's going to pay." The room erupted into chaos as the girls surged forward, their fury a living, breathing entity that consumed the space. They pushed him back, their strength fueled by a collective rage that had been simmering for months. Coach Stevens stumbled, his eyes widening in shock and fear as he realized he had underestimated them. With a swift movement, Kirsty snatched the camera from his hand and smashed it on the floor, the pieces scattering like shards of his shattered control. The girls tore his clothes away, exposing his naked, sweaty body, a stark contrast to their determined faces. They grabbed him, holding him down as Kirsty took out her phone and began to record. "This is what happens when you mess with us," she said, her voice cold and hard. "We're not your playthings. We're not your toys." The coach struggled, his face contorting in rage as he spat curses at them, but he was no match for the fury of the young women he had sought to control. They turned the tables, stripping him bare of his power and dignity. One by one, the girls stepped forward, their eyes filled with a fierce satisfaction as they touched him in the most degrading ways possible, forcing him to feel the humiliation and pain he had inflicted on them. They were no longer the meek and submissive girls he had taken advantage of. They were a united front, a force to be reckoned with. The video they made was explicit and damning, a testament to his depravity. They posted it anonymously on the school's website, and within hours, the news had spread like wildfire. The school board was notified, and Coach Stevens was fired on the spot. His life was over, and the girls had reclaimed their power. The aftermath was a storm of interviews, therapy, and legal proceedings. But through it all, the team remained strong, supporting each other as they faced the trauma of their shared experiences.